Alrighty. Hello, everybody. So, today I think we're finally going to work on something that I've wanted to try and tackle for a little while now, which is that if you look at our, I have this test for purchasing products. And some of these tests are like really sort of out of control. So here's a test for purchasing a product with no sales tax. We kind of do a bunch of stuff to replace some stuff in the container with some test doubles. We go and create a product, and then we make a post request to purchase that product to create a new checkout. And then we do a ton of different asserting. So we make sure that the purchase happened. We make sure that a fulfillment was attempted, which is where we try to make this webhook request to the person's server to let them know that someone bought and then get back the URL. And we make some assertions about the response that came back from the fulfillment. So this is the fulfillment request details, fulfillment response details. We make some assertions about the actual response itself. So after someone has gone ahead and paid, this is what they should get back. We make sure that the credit card gateway was charged, and we make sure that the webhook dispatcher tried to deliver the fulfillment attempt. So it's a lot of stuff, and I would like to figure out a way to simplify some of this by maybe committing to some of the design a little bit more so that we can use some more test doubles at some boundaries and simplify some things so we can split the test up into multiple tests. So the thing that I was thinking about doing is if we look at the product checkouts controller at the store method, we find the product, we validate the request, we create this like kind of just plain PHP customer object. We create a new checkout for that product with that customer, and then complete that checkout, which is what creates their purchase. And then from there, we try to fulfill that purchase and then return a response. Now, a lot of the assertions here are related to things that only happen due to this like fulfillment step. So, for example, checking the details about the fulfillment attempt, as well as stuff about this webhook dispatcher, those are only related to the fact that we do this fulfillment thing. So if you look at this test, which is like, let's see, the whole test is 97 lines long. If we could get rid of the stuff that's only related to fulfillment, I think we'd be able to cut that. Basically, all this would go away. All this would go away. And we'd be down to a 58-line test. So close to half of the test we'd be able to get rid of. And then we'd only be worrying about verifying that the purchase happened. Some details about the response. And some of this would have to change a little bit because we don't want to really be relying on this fulfillment URL, which we won't be specifying. And then making sure that the account or the credit card was charged. So I think the way that I would like to do this is basically by refactoring this. So I want this purchase fulfillment thing, since it doesn't actually have any impact on what we respond with. Like if the purchase fulfillment fails, we don't even care. Like we still return the exact same thing. So to me, this seems like something that makes sense to move outside of this whole flow and maybe do it based on some sort of like event-driven thing. So whenever someone completes their purchase, we fire like an event that says like a purchase was completed or a checkout was completed. And from there, we listen for that event, and whenever a purchase is completed, maybe we attempt to fulfill it. But from the perspective of like the checkouts controller, it doesn't really care about that happening. So I think it's reasonable to move that to an event. So let's think about the best way to do that. So I think we have a test for a listener here. We have a fulfillment failed listener. So whenever we try to fulfill a purchase and that fulfillment fails, we dispatch this fulfillment failed event. And we want to make sure that whenever that event is fired, an email gets sent to the person who created the product so that they know that something's wrong with their server. So I'd like to make another test for a new listener, and we'll drive out this new listener and then like kind of swap it out and then refactor the other test. So this listener is going to be what attempts to fulfill purchases. So something I've been trying to figure out lately, which I haven't landed on a great convention for, is how to name my listeners. I don't really like naming them after the event. It's not describing what the listener really does. So I'm starting to think it might make more sense to name the listeners kind of like jobs. So they're more like verbs. So I'm going to leave the fulfillment failed one as is, but I'm kind of wondering if like for the one that we're about to create, which is going to be like a product or a purchase completed listener or something stupid like that, I wonder if we should just name it based on what it's going to do, which is going to be fulfilling purchases. So let's try it and see how it goes. I'm going to call this class fulfill purchase. Or like attempt. Let's see. Should we call it fulfill purchase or should we call it like attempt fulfillment? Attempt fulfillment. Because it's not necessarily guaranteed to work. And if it doesn't work, it's also not the end of the world. So, yeah. Attempt fulfillment. Let's try attempt fulfillment. So we're going to name a listener attempt fulfillment and kind of see how this turns out. All right, so let's rename this test to attempt fulfillment test. And get rid of a lot of stuff here. We're going to dispatch an event, and that's how we'll test that the listener is wired up properly. So rather than testing the listener directly, we'll test it sort of indirectly by firing an event that it's meant to listen to. So we'll have to think about what to name that event. Like, I'm trying to decide whether I want to call it purchase complete, or purchase succeeded, or checkout complete, or checkout succeeded. It's hard to say. I'm leaning towards, I don't think it really matters that much, but it is an interesting decision to have to make. So if it was called purchase succeeded, that's probably fine. Purchase succeeded. And we'll dispatch that with a purchase. So we're going to want to create a purchase. So let's keep some of this setup here. So we're going to have a user, we're going to have a product, and we're going to have a purchase. And we're going to fire a purchase succeeded event with the purchase. And then we want to make some assertions about what should happen. So at this point, what I'm going to do is copy over some of the assertions from here. So we want to verify that the fulfillment attempts happened, right? So let's copy this and paste that here. This is going to be kind of gnarly. And we'll have to think about the consequences of like a lot of this stuff, to be honest. Like what stuff we'll have to set up. And we're going to also want to capture the fact that a webhook was dispatched. So let's paste that in. And then we're also going to want to have to set up the webhook dispatcher. So we're going to want to copy this setup code here. And let's import a bunch of classes. Okay. All right. So this is, we want to check what was saved in the request JSON. So I'm trying to remember how this is set up. So basically this is going to have to match like some columns on the purchases table. So let's look at the create purchase table migration. And we'll keep both these open so we can look at them together. Because basically what we want to do is take whatever the stuff is here and seed it the same way when we create the purchase. So we're going to want to specify an email. We used Michael Dorinda. Why not? An amount, a subtotal, the tax. Now the charge ID, it doesn't really matter. We can just say like test charge, you know, ABC123, because it's not going to come back from the actual credit card gateway in this case. Welcome, James from Zimbabwe. Country, zip code. And I think those all match these fields, right? We don't need to specify the card last four because we're not sending that through. Although it's possible that we could, but we won't for now. And then for the response stuff, I think we have that programmed up here. So here's the cache, control, content encoding, content type headers. So those are specified here. The URL is going to be this, so that's going to be okay. We need to specify the endpoint for the product, though, actually. So let's check that out up here. So when we create the product, we specify a webhook URL. So we're going to have to do that as part of our product setup here, too. And let's double check that that's as simple as I think. Create products table. Yeah, cool. Interesting. All right. Seems okay. So we're going to be trading a lot of the complexity out of this test and into this test, which is sad in its own way, but it's still going to be a bit of an improvement. All right, so the last thing is this webhook thing, which again is going to be really similar to this. So let's just kind of get this passing as is, and then we can think about, like, is there anything that we want to do to simplify this? Hard to say. So let's rename this test that says fulfillment is attempted when a purchase succeeds. And we'll switch back to a single column view here. So something funky will happen here. We'll just go one error at a time. So there is no purchase succeeded class inside there, which of course makes sense. So let's create an event for that. So let's do artisan make event. And I can never remember the options here. So it's just the name that we have to specify. Purchase succeeded. And again, I'm not totally committed to this name, but we'll see where it gets us. So import that, run the test again. Failed asserting the actual size 0 matches expected size 1. So line 58, we want the fulfillment attempt to happen, but it's not happening. So we're these errors are not going to guide us super clearly. We're going to have to do a little bit of work ourselves, I think. So let's head over to our app event service provider. Let's wire up a new event. We'll say whenever a purchase succeeded event fires, we want to call the attempt fulfillment listener. Just really just going to be more of like a function, right? It's kind of like an invocable class almost. That's kind of the naming structure that we're using anyways. So let's run this now, and we should get an error that there is no attempt fulfillment listener. So let's create that. I think this is the one that requires the other option. Name, and then event. Okay, so we'll call it attempt fulfillment, and it listens to the purchase succeeded event, which I think is just going to add a type int, which we're just going to delete anyways. Okay, so we got a bunch of comments. Well, what font size am I at now? Did I screw that up? 15 is my desired font size. Comments can go. This can go. This does not need a type int. They are banned from this project. So it's really brain dead simple. And now we can run that test again and see what happens. Okay, so now we're back to failed asserting that actual size is 0 and matches expected size 1. So basically, nothing is happening in regards to attempting to fulfill the purchase. So I think we can actually do this pretty easily. So let's say purchase succeeded. So this needs to take a purchase and its constructor, right? So let's add that. So we'll take a purchase. I think we need to make it public. We don't need comments. I don't think we need any of these traits. What is the serializes model trait used for with events? Is it only for queuable events? I'm not going to worry about that. I don't feel like we need that. Same with this broadcast on method. This isn't going to get broadcast to the client. It's just on the server side. And we'll delete any unused imports. And we got like a pretty simple little class here. Let's move that trait to the top. All right. This is still going to do the same thing. But now I feel like in attempt fulfillment, we can get the events, purchase, fulfill. And in theory, that gets us green. Amazing. So this is such a simple class. It basically does nothing. But it does let us move this fulfillment code out to another location. So something that's interesting is that the purchasing a product with no sales tax test, if we did everything right, should still pass. And it does still pass because even though we're duplicating a lot of the assertions here, the effects are still the same because the event is actually going to fire, right? So it's going to run through all the real event stuff. Now, if we were to do like event fake here, so if we get the facade here, I think it's going to fail now. No, doesn't fail. I'm surprised that that doesn't fail. I thought when we faked events, they would not fire. Let's look into that. Event fake. So for some reason, the fake is still, even though we're trying to fake the events, they're still getting through. If we go to this attempt fulfillment thing, oh, actually, no, duh. Okay, this works. Now we can refactor. That's the step that we were missing. We're still doing the fulfillment directly here. So we can cut this fulfill call, head to the checkout class, go to the complete method, and in the complete method, we can create the purchase. This is grim. So it's going to be like purchase equals this. return purchase. So there's a tap opportunity that exists here. And then we would say purchase succeeded, dispatch with the purchase. And we'll pull that in. Now let's see what happens. Test is still green, but if we fake the events, that should fail. Okay, so now they fail because once the events are faked, the stuff that's relying on events firing is not working. So before we do that, let's maybe refactor a little bit inside the checkout class. So one thing we could do here is, like ultimately what I think I want to do is something like return, tap, this, function, purchase, purchase succeeded, dispatch. And this should do the exact same thing. And it does. But it's a little gross, right? Like tapping something that's this long is not my favorite thing to do. So I don't know if we're doing, yeah, total price, tax, should be taxed. So let's add a helper to the bottom here called, what should we call it? Store purchase, create purchase, and it takes a charge. And then all we have to do is basically copy this code here and return all that. So we return this purchase is create using the charge. Everything else on here is instance state, so that's all good. And then here we can replace this with just this, create purchase from the charge. And that's a little bit shorter and should still hopefully work. And it does. So let's try the whole suite just to make sure we're not crazy. Oh, shit. Purchasing products test 207. So what test is this? The webhook fits. Okay, so this one is just because we're faking events, because we're using events for something else in this test. So this test is actually going to get moved to the attempt fulfillment test, I think. Or it's just going to become sort of unnecessary because it's not really, this behavior shouldn't really exist at this level. So let's go back to this first test. All right, so I think we can simplify this a little bit now. Let's fake the events. And then specify that basically right here, we can say event assert dispatched, and then it's a purchase succeeded event, right? And this is going to take an event, and here we just want to return event purchase is purchase. And then I think I feel pretty comfortable commenting out these for a second. Commenting out the webhook dispatcher stuff. And just seeing what happens. One failure. Fail asserting that null matches expected. Okay, that's not unreasonable. So that's fine, because the fulfillment URL is not getting updated now, because that happens during the fulfillment process. So it's not this test's job to even check that. That gets checked. Well, actually, that should get checked in the other test. So let's actually do that. So let's do this. Assert equals. Copy over this fulfillment URL. Purchase fresh fulfillment URL. run this test. Okay, so that's good. So if we were to go to the purchase class and look at the fulfill method, you can see that this is where we do that update, right? So if we, for whatever reason, didn't do that, this test would fail. So that's covering what we want it to cover. So I feel pretty good about that, which means I feel comfortable deleting it here because, again, as far as this test knows, that column doesn't get updated. It gets updated in a listener. So it has nothing to do with the flow that's happening in this test. So let's run this again. Okay, so fail asserting that false is true. So we need to import this event. And okay, so now we're getting an error on line 135. Okay, so that's here. So I think we can actually just delete that too, because we don't know that that's going to get set. Okay, cool. So I feel good about this test. Let's delete the stuff that we don't need. And I think I'll move this assertion to the bottom. Cool. And I think we can also get rid of this webhook dispatcher stuff, because the webhook dispatcher is not going to get used in this test now. Okay, so that's green. And the whole test is like 48 lines. So like that's like half the size that it was before, which is an improvement. It's still admittedly not a short test, but it does a lot. So let's run the whole suite now. Or sorry, this whole file. So now we're getting an error in the webhook fails one. Oh, shit. And again, this is like kind of silly because the webhook failing now happens as a result of the event getting fired. So I feel like it's not our problem in this test to worry about this, but I do think it's something that we need to worry about when we're testing this like attempting fulfillment process. Now, there's a case to be made for not testing all this stuff through the listener and instead just testing the fulfill method on the purchase. And then just testing in here that when the event fires that we pass through like a test double for the purchase into the listener. Like this could be a mock. And we could verify that the fulfill method gets called on the purchase, right? But I'm not super confident going down that path because if I had to guess how this code was going to change, I feel like there's a chance that some of this fulfillment logic gets moved out of the purchase class and into the listener. So I feel better testing fulfillment by testing the listener and treating the fact that all it does is delegate to purchase fulfill as sort of like a implementation detail that we are blind to. So sort of treating this as a black box. I would rather test it that way than commit to this design by using a test double for the purchase. So let's think about how we can, what we need to do to test the failing webhook scenario with the listener. So a lot of this doesn't really matter. Like you can see, basically we're asserting the purchase gets created, that a fulfillment attempt happened. Even though it came back with a 500, we still got a response back. The customer was still charged, and that a fulfillment failed event was dispatched, right? So I'm actually like pretty confident that the right thing to do here is to copy this implementation and create a new test here. So we're going to have to rename this test. This isn't going to be fulfillment is attempted when a purchase succeeds anymore. This is going to be like the scenario where the fulfillment attempt succeeds. And then we're going to have another test called the fulfillment attempt fails. So we're kind of using this naming convention You might see it in my snippet here. The one where. This is something that I think came out of like the BDD world. It's an interesting naming convention for your tests when otherwise the test name would be really long. You can just use it to describe the situation and then let the test sort of describe the outcome. So this is the test where the fulfillment attempt fails. This is the one where the fulfillment attempt succeeds. So let's paste in the implementation that we got from that other test and tweak it as needed. So we don't need an order confirmation number. We don't need a credit card gateway. This one's kind of tricky because we do want to fake events, but we only want to fake certain events. I added a PR to Laravel to allow faking only certain events, but it might have been 5.5 only. So let's look, because it's something that I thought was pretty useful. So let's look for a pull request where I am the author. Allow faking only specific events. Only merged into master. I'm not willing to update to Laravel 5.5 quite yet, because I'm not sure what is needed. So I guess we will have to pause on that. So maybe what we do is we write 3 tests. So you remember how I was talking about how I would like testing this by just firing the event and making sure that the thing gets called? Because that means that we're testing the fact that we wired things up properly in the event service provider. Another way that we could do that is writing another test for that and then newing up the attempt fulfillment listener here. So if we rewrote this to just create the event and just say new attempt fulfillment, import that, handle. This should still pass. So now we're just testing the listener directly. But now we can write another test where we can say fulfillment is attempted when a purchase succeeds. So this is the test name that we had before. But now we can just worry about testing that this listener is called when that event is fired. So I'll show you what I mean there. So we can take this, we can dispatch it, and we can bind a mock of the attempt fulfillment listener to the container. So we can say this instance attempt fulfillment class should be replaced by a mock. So we can say listener equals mockery spy attempt fulfillment class. And then here we can say listener should have received handle. And if we want, we can say with mockery. I think it's mockery. How does this work? Mockery with something like that. docs.mockery.io. Expectation declarations. Where is it? Argument matching with closures. Nope. We don't want mockery any. Unless something has changed, but you used to have to do mockery something. I swear there was like a call that we used for this. Argument validation. If we just look in here for mockery : : I think we'll find what I'm looking for. Mockery on. That's the one. So using mockery on, we can specify a closure that lets us define how this should get matched. So here we can return event what's the best way to do this? I mean, basically we want to verify that the event that we fired here is what got fired here. So it's probably easier to not do this with dispatch, to instead just say like new purchase succeeded. If we look at the dispatch on dispatchable, so there's a static function dispatch. So all they do is they call the event function. So we can say purchase succeeded equals that. And we'll just fire that event through the system. And we'll use the purchase succeeded here. And we want to just verify that the event that got passed into the handle method is exactly the purchase succeeded event that we created. Now we don't have a purchase here, but it doesn't really matter in our case. We can just do mockery mock purchase class. Now this is like a very test double E heavy test. Okay, class mockery not found. So let's import that. Did it work? No. We'll have to do it manually. Let's at least force us to have it wired up. And does this one work? It does. So now we can handle the failure case. So we do want to fake events here. And we want to test it by newing up the listener. That's going to happen here. We're going to want to copy probably our setup for the purchase and product and stuff here. So we don't need to call this create product. We don't need this response stuff. Yeah, so this fulfillment stuff is definitely the gnarlier part of this whole thing. So we're creating a mock of the webhook dispatcher that when someone calls deliver, returns a specific failed delivery. We don't need to verify that the purchase was created because the purchase already exists. We do want to verify that the fulfillment attempt was made the way that we kind of expect. And we want to verify that we save like the 500 version. There's no response to assert against. There's no credit card stuff. We want to assert that fulfillment failed. I think it's also worth asserting that the fulfillment URL is still null because we didn't get a fulfillment URL back. So let's just see. This will fail probably, yeah, some missing stuff. Some imports. The bane of my existence. Okay, webhook delivery, gotta import that. Probably webhook dispatcher. Call undefined method. Attempt fulfillment test server error body. Shitty. Okay, so there's a helper method that I had in my other test that I bet you only got used in that one spot. But it's trying to be like a realistic server error. So we can cut that out and we can paste that into this new test. Oh, what's going on here? We have to outdent this by 1. These here doc strings are the worst. All right, what do we got next? Green. Cool. So that is satisfying enough to me. Let's check out what else is going on in this file. So we still got a couple errors. So let's check 128. Oh, so there's a server error body situation. Oh yeah, this is the webhook fails test. So now it doesn't matter if the webhook fails because it has nothing to do with this test. So we can delete this whole thing. Okay, so now this is back to green, but a lot of these tests can get simplified again. So we can fake the events in the Ontario sales tax situation. We don't need the webhook dispatcher. We do want to verify that the event gets dispatched. So let's stick that at the bottom, but we don't need the dispatcher assertions. We don't need anything related to fulfillment. And that should be everything. We can change this to not check the fulfillment URL because it's not going to be set yet. And I think we can do the same thing for the BC sales tax test. So this can go. Fulfillment attempts can go. The JSON, we're not checking it in this case. Interesting. Oh yeah, no, there we are. And this assert dispatched gets copied in there because we do still want to make sure that gets dispatched in that case, although it's extremely unlikely. I think another refactoring task is going to be kind of introducing a boundary as to how the price that gets charged to the credit card is calculated. So I had a couple tests here for proving that the system worked under different conditions, right? So this is when there's no sales tax and everything is kind of hard coded just to handle Canadian sales tax because that was what I needed to do. So I wrote these tests sort of at the highest possible black box level. So something to handle no tax, Ontario tax, and BC tax. And I felt pretty comfortable that as long as like those three situations were handled, that everything was going to be working. I think the system is going to get more complex. So it's probably going to make sense to introduce some sort of new class that's responsible solely for calculating total costs of things with tax applied. And if I introduce a new service in the system for that, then I can probably use a test double of that service in these tests. And then I can probably get rid of all but one of these tests because I'll just be programming what response should come back. So I don't need to test multiple situations here. And then I'll have different tests for the actual tax calculation stuff separately. But for now, we'll keep them as is because it gives me some confidence. Well, it gives me a lot of confidence, but yeah, it's not super flexible. All right. Cool. So I think aside from that, things are looking pretty good. We might actually be able to simplify more of these. So we don't need to fake the webhook dispatcher here. We don't need to assert that anything was delivered. What we could do, though, is make assertions about the events not firing. So let's assert, is assert not dispatched a thing? Yeah, we pass through the event name. So let's make sure that no events were fired here. So if the validation fails, the credit card should not be charged and no events should fire. So that's fine. So we can do that with some of these other ones too. So we can replace basically all the assertions about the webhooks not firing with assertions about the events not firing. Oh, it's not what I meant to do, but that's fine. And yeah, that should be good. So get rid of this, get this, paste that in, delete that. Good. Yeah, we can group all these assertions together. Zip is required for USA. So the tests related to checking for zip code presence are kind of interesting ones related to how Stripe handles token creation. Something that I don't see a lot of people doing, but in my opinion, it's very worthwhile to validate by inspecting the token that the person used, by fetching it back from the API to look at, to verify that they really did fill out the form with all the details that you wanted, because it's possible for someone to manipulate a credit card form and delete like the zip code field. And if they do that, then when you fetch a token from Stripe, Stripe doesn't care that you didn't provide a zip code field because it's not mandatory. But if you don't provide one, then it can't use it to verify with the bank. So you're kind of at like an increased risk of fraud by not verifying on the server side that, yes, when someone filled out the form and created this token, a zip code was associated with this token. So Stripe can only check zip code stuff, as far as I know, against US, Canadian, and UK banks, because those are kind of the only countries that really care about it. So those are the places where I have tests for. So if I use like a British credit card to get a token and I don't pass through an address, then there should be a validation error. That's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. So here we're checking that a token was passed through. A payment token must be a real payment token, so they can't just use a token that doesn't match up with a token on Stripe's end. Still good. Payment token must have a CVC. So this is another similar situation. So CVC code, like the little check code on the back of your credit card, is not required to charge your card. And someone can manipulate the form and not pass that through. But then you're at an increased risk of fraud again. So I like to double check by requesting the token from Stripe and inspecting it, that stuff is all good. Something interesting about that, let's finish this quickly, then I'll show you how I'm doing that, because it's kind of neat. I'll need to refactor it for 5.5. Maybe something we can do on Friday is work on upgrading the app to Laravel 5.5, because I'm comfortable using 5.5 before it's done, but I'm not sure what's involved yet. So attempting checkout when product is not live, so we'll fake the events. This will be the last one, I think. But anyways, something you might have seen in Laravel 5.5 is these new validation rule objects. And this app was actually kind of like the motivation for getting those into core. So you can see here, I take the request and I validate it. And this is a macro, but this is available in 5.5 out of the box too. So I validate that the email that was passed in is required and that it is an email. And then the payment token, validating the payment token is quite complicated, right? It's not just about validating the string, it's about fetching it back from Stripe's API and it's inspecting metadata surrounding it. So I create this object called a new valid payment token, which is an instance of a validation rule. And I pass through any dependencies it has. In this case, it needs access to the credit card gateway to be able to talk to Stripe. And if you look at the valid payment token, the way that this works is it takes the credit card gateway and it has a fails method and a passes method. And I think the API in Laravel 5.5 officially is just passes. This is all kind of like homebrewed stuff that I built on top of Laravel's validation system. So anyways, what happens is the Stripe token gets passed in here. I use the Stripe API to fetch that token back from Stripe. And then I check, is the zip code valid and is the CVC valid on the payment token? And if either of those are not valid, this ends up returning false. Or if Stripe throws an exception because there is no payment token, then I also return false. So to check if the zip code is valid, I basically just say, if the payment token's country is Canada, the US, or Great Britain, then the payment token has to have a zip. And I have a payment token class, which you can see here. And has zip, the way that that works, is it checks to see that the zip code is not null, and also that the zip check field is not null. So Stripe has this field that says whether or not they can check the zip code. And the values for that are either null, which means they're not going to check it, or the string unchecked, which means we are going to check it, but we haven't checked it yet. So you want it to be unchecked because that means that the customer did pass through a zip code. The other thing that I check is if it has a valid CVC. So I can't know the CVC back from Stripe, right? Because that's like secret information. And the whole reason you use Stripe and their JavaScript libraries and stuff is that none of that data ever hits your servers. But we can check if there was a CVC passed, again, by checking the CVC check field. So if the CVC check field is null, that means they didn't pass a CVC at all. But if the CVC checked field is the string unchecked, then that means the CVC was provided, but Stripe hasn't checked it yet. So anyways, that's an example of like an interesting custom validation rule that I use to validate this payment token that comes through. And some stuff that's worth knowing when it comes to verifying stuff that comes from Stripe and making sure that people aren't tampering with your forms and trying to mess you up. So this controller action is looking nicer now. I really hated the fact that we just had like this arbitrary purchase fulfill call here and we just didn't care what happened with it. This feels a lot cleaner to me now. And being able to extract a lot of those tests out is nice. We kind of just like swept some of the garbage somewhere else. Like these tests are still quite heavy, but they are lighter than what these tests used to be. And these tests, I feel like are pretty decent now, especially once we extract like some new tax calculation thing. There's really only going to be one test that like looks kind of like this, and that's going to be the extent of all the complexity. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Quick question. If the Stripe side fails there, does the user get an error? The validation rule seems to say otherwise. So, if this exception gets thrown, is that what you're talking about? Only has email errors. So if we look at the controller, yeah, so these are custom errors. So I basically wanted to override what the text was going to be for these errors. So by default, that's going to use like the language validation things. So instead of saying the attribute must be a valid email address, I wanted it to say your email address is invalid. It just looks nicer than like the email field must be a valid email address. It's just kind of, I don't know, I'm just not into the defaults a lot of the time. Same for required. You know, required is going to come back as the email field is required. I'd rather just say, yeah, your email address is incomplete. Just like kind of hand picking the language a little bit more. The messages for the payment token are actually built into the payment token rule. I'm not sure if you can easily override them, but here we just have that built in here. So the message they're going to get is just your card information is invalid. Anyways, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today. I think I'm happy with some of the stuff that we were able to do, and it's simplified some things and cleaned some things up. So hopefully that was fun, and hopefully you learned a couple interesting things, and I'll see you on Friday if you're going to be around. If you're in the U.S., happy 4th of July. Go celebrate your independence and fire some fireworks. But if you're not, happy Tuesday. All right. See you, everyone.